So, yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to open. I'm very pleased to open the discussion today on the short-term energy crisis management in the European Union. Yesterday, Simone, in his panel, discussed with us the long-term implications of the current energy crisis, and including opportunities of that in terms of international collaboration, technology, and essentially highlighting that there are choices between good options. Now, today, the task that I have is a bit more challenging, I would think, because we are going to have the more mundane challenge of discussing how we essentially prevent a systemic crisis or systemic risk to materialize. You all are aware that Europe is ahead of a very, very tough winter. We already now see prices in gas and electricity on the wholesale markets increased tenfold. The implications of that for companies, for consumers, also for energy companies, are very disturbing, and it's an unprecedented situation that is quite clear cannot kind of stay like that for another year or two, because the political implications of this will also be not only internally but also for Europe's foreign policy will be drastic. So this crisis needs to be managed, and it needs to be managed in a sensible way. And the problem is, in contrast to the good options that Simone had to compare yesterday, we today have to compare essentially a lot of relatively bad options and choose the least bad of them. Now, the great thing is that I have an excellent panel today to discuss that with. 4 panelists that are essentially sitting in the middle of the storm, all extremely busy at the moment because the crisis is taking a very strong toll on them. And they are not only dealing with kind of addressing the symptoms of the crisis, but also trying to address the root causes. Now, without further ado, I think it would be best to ask each of the panelists to come up with 2 or 3 kind of main ideas of what they think needs to be done or what they are already doing in order to make sure that we get over the winter in a way that kind of does not crash our energy system. So I would like to start by giving the floor to Ditte Juul Jørgensen. She is the Director General at DG Ener, and kind of the person at which a lot of the crisis management at the European level currently converges. So Ditte, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for this timely discussion. We are focusing in today's discussion, as you said, on the short term, but maybe just one comment here, which is it is critical that what we do short term, what we do in terms of emergency intervention, aligns with our longer term strategic objectives. And so one has to be careful not to look at those two in isolation. So just as a follow-up to that. And the other point you were making is about symptoms and root causes. Again, even when we act swiftly, when we act in a crisis, as much as possible, we should get close to the root causes so that we're not just treating symptoms, but really making the changes that are necessary in the European energy market, in the European Energy Union. You've asked for me to say 2 or 3 things. I cannot limit myself to 2 or 3 things, because what we're looking at is a crisis that comes at us from many different sides at the same time, and that impacts all of our energy system and all of our economy. So just to take a step back, where are we? The crisis is global. You see at the global level very tight markets and an imbalance between demand essentially coming online faster than supply. We could see that already as a result of the COVID lockdown, in the sense that demand spiked when we opened again, while the investments into additional supply, additional LNG capacity, for example, coming online, was delayed. So you had that problem already at that stage. This was then combined with what we saw already last spring, decrease in supply from Russia that made it difficult for Europe to fill its gas storage. Clearly, this was planned. This was a measure, a weaponization of gas that started before the war. And obviously, the war, the Russian invasion into Ukraine has had a significant further impact in terms of insecurity and in terms of the continued lowering of supplies. So we are working, as you've also said, with some very significant geopolitical challenges as well as global imbalances in the energy markets. And I think that's an important perspective to have when we look at what do we do within Europe, what can we do? There's a lot we can do. Some of these aspects we are the masters of, our demand, for example, but other aspects are outside our control, global markets, those global imbalances. And so that context, that perspective on what can we do and how do we best act and how do we best align it with our longer term targets, I think is a critical one to have. So just to briefly recall, what have we done since the war? We have launched the Repower EU strategy and action plan, essentially to allow us to move away from our dependence on Russian fossil fuels. 3 simple components. If really to simplify, we need to reduce our consumption, we need renewables, and we need to replace Russian sources with other sources. So those are the 3 key components. And whatever we do, we need to start with a lowering of consumption. Reducing our demand is where we are in control, and it is a necessary element of any action that we take. We have reviewed, all member states have reviewed their national preparedness plans. As we could see, we were getting into a difficult filling season, a difficult end of the winter last year. We have adopted a storage regulation, first time ever that we have a European common rule set around gas storage. You may have seen that the target was 80% this year by 1st of November. We are currently at 82, so we're ahead of schedule. That hasn't been cheap, it hasn't been easy, but it was necessary to do that to make sure we go into the winter as prepared as possible. And then, of course, this summer, we intervened decisively on the demand side, by the agreement to reduce overall demand of natural gas across the European Union to 15%, and by giving ourselves a new tool, an EU alert mechanism that can be triggered when that is necessary in gas. And now that we have done that, we are more ready for further action. We are less vulnerable, we're better prepared. And so the reason I set this out and the framing is, I think the sequencing of what we can do in terms of intervening into energy markets is absolutely critical. You cannot start intervening on gas prices before you know that you have what you need for the winter and before you have reduced your demand, because an intervention into gas prices could have an impact on the supplies. So again, sequencing really matters in what we're doing. What we're seeing now in the markets is very, very high electricity prices. They have been high since the beginning of the crisis because the electricity market is exactly that. It's a market. And so the highest marginal cost, the highest marginal price sets the overall prices, not by design, but by how markets function. That has a very significant impact on our households. It has a significant impact on our competitiveness, on our industry, and we do see increasingly serious liquidity concerns out there and financial market challenges as well. So here and now, our focus is on what do we do to alleviate that challenge. You will have seen President von der Leyen announce what we're working on. We're working on demand reduction, shaving off the peaks in terms of electricity demand. We are working on a measure to make sure that we can help vulnerable households, that we can create revenues that can go back to consumers so that they can be compensated by a proposal in that regard. And we're working on other aspects of a possible package of possible proposals. They will be discussed among ministers on Friday, so I cannot today go into details of that, but you will have seen the announcements of the President. So rather than give you, this is the package, let me give you the basic principles that are guiding us in what we do. First of all, we're in an emergency, so whatever we do, it has to be simple and it has to be implementable across Europe. Secondly, we obviously want to make sure that we protect our internal market. Our internal market and our internal energy market gives us security of supply. It helps on the price setting. It helps making sure that the energy goes where it is needed. We obviously want to make sure that whatever we do on electricity or other energy sources or other energy carriers, that we do not increase the gas demand, because there's not going to be more gas out there. We need to continue to lower our gas demand. Obviously, we also want to make sure that whatever we do, we don't put at risk our security of supply. And then we want to make sure that we help consumers, we help, and here I'm talking households, but of course also the business side of things, the industry side of things. And then, as I said at the beginning, we have to make sure that whatever we do, we align with our long-term strategic objectives. And here I'm talking about, obviously, the Green Deal, the transition towards more renewables, more energy efficient energy systems, more electrification, and the use of green hydrogen in particular as one of the energy carriers. So whatever you will see coming from us in the coming week and beyond will be built on these key principles, and always starting with we need to reduce demand. Otherwise, the other measures we need to take will either not be effective or will have negative effects, and so an important way to approach that. And I think I'll stop there. I could speak for hours about this because there really is a lot going on, but I think I should leave the floor to others as well. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot, Dieter. I mean, it's fascinating the comprehensive principles you set out, and when starting to think about how to square this circle, it's probably getting interesting. So I hope we can come back to that in the panel discussion. And now let me give the floor to Carlos Francesco Starace, the CEO of Enel. Sorry, I'm just having to look back. And he is leading one of the largest European energy companies active in essentially all major energy sources and in many European countries. So he has a very broad view and a very clear view on the challenges ahead. And I would also like to ask you, what are essentially your 2 or 3 things that you would hope the Commission this Friday or in the coming weeks and months, or national governments come up with in order to protect European citizens and companies against this energy crisis?
Thank you, Georg, and thank you for inviting me here. I want to start from where the Director General has just ended. I think that it is important that we preserve certain key principles, whatever we do, that they are clearly the direction in which we were heading, which is the transformation of the energy sector in Europe towards a decarbonized end. And I think that is today something that the present crisis reinforces in, if you want, in a spectacular manner. And that must be preserved by all means. Whatever measures we implement in the short term should not go in the direction of increasing, but rather decreasing the demand of gas, and should not impair our ability to source gas wherever possible on the very short term in order to survive not only the next winter, but also the spring and summer that follow, because let's not forget, if we get through the winter, we will get through the winter with a depleted storage that needs to be replaced immediately and refilled. So what are the things we think are necessary? And before we say that, let me just point out one little, but not so little, corollary that results from the extremely high and totally unwarranted prices of gas that we have in Europe today. Not only this is creating havoc on the energy cost standpoint, so it's placing a burden on the industry and households in terms of energy costs going forward. But more sadly, but much more impactful, is the fact that most players are exposed to margin deposits, so the money that players have to set aside when they operate on the stock exchange, on the gas exchange, as a function of the variation and the volatility of the TTF index. Today, the global exposure of all the players in Europe exceeds by far 200 billion euros, which means that most companies, and that includes us, but I would say most companies, all the companies that work on the gas market, have to set aside cash in order to manage the volatility of the margins, the evolution of the margins that are as a function of the TTF index. This means that you have 200 billions of euros that cannot be used. They cannot be used for investments, and they cannot be used for any other employment, if not just to cover the commitments that each company has made on this platform. And this number varies; it goes up or down as a function of the TTF index. This is about tenfold what normally has been in the last years. So it is very important to notice that some countries have started, the government of some countries have started helping companies to put money aside because the companies don't have any more. We saw Switzerland doing that yesterday. We saw Sweden starting to do that the day before. We saw Germany doing it a little bit in the past. So this is something that is creating a problem for the 23-24 investment cycle. I mean, most companies will not be able to invest enough because of the money paralyzed in this strange and completely artificial situation. So this second consideration, coupled with the first one, the incredible variation of the prices of the TTF index, puts us in the mindset to say that we should take a break, sanction a timeout, and a reset to the TTF index volatility. If you want something that has already happened in another exchange, the LME on nickel just a couple of months ago, so this volatility is today out of control. It does not, I repeat, reflect the actual price of gas that is imported into Europe, but it rather reflects a preoccupation and some kind of, let's say, speculative approach to this pricing that is creating itself, enhancing itself the problem. So I think it is important for decisions to be taken with the right time and with the right access, that this is a little bit stopped. We advocate for a cap to the index volatility, not to the price of gas. That the two things are not the same thing. And this index should be capped for, I would say, a period of 6 to 12 months in order for this frenzy of speculation to come down and let decision makers and the industry survive this period. I think the Director General is right that this decision could not have been made before the storage was full and before we had some kind of visibility of how much gas we have for the winter. Now we have that. So I think it's the right time to do this. We are convinced that this measure will be taken no matter what people think. It will have to be taken sooner or later, and the later we take it, the more expensive this decision will result to be. I think we have, as a second measure, to accelerate the reform of the electricity markets. The separation between the marginal cost of generating electricity with combined cycle burning gas and nuclear or renewable energy that have not to depend on this commodity price is important. If you want, most integrated utilities already apply this, so it's not such a traumatic measure that people think. We do that all the time. When we sell power to our customers, we don't sell it based on marginal system pricing cost considerations. It would be crazy. But I think it's important that we implement this market design, and more importantly, probably, is that we finally insert into the market design tools that the European Union wants to have, a long-term electricity market tool. If you want to buy electricity 10 years or 15 years or 20 years in Europe, this is not there. This market doesn't exist, but it does exist elsewhere in the world. And the fact that if we did have such a market, this would be the natural place for renewable energy to show in a very transparent and clear manner its convenience, the stability of the prices it can project, and the interest that our industry would have in this tool. So we think it's important that this longer term market design phase is completed and this market is launched into Europe, because that would indeed be the separation between the actual separation between gas priced electricity and non-gas priced electricity. There is not a 10 years gas price market, so there would not be a 10 years gas price electricity market. And that would be the physical the differentiation that everybody will be able to see. The third thing I would like to emphasize, I think and the Director General has already done that, is that we need to accelerate the decarbonization of Europe. By doing this, we need to, in order to do this, we need to basically stop burning gas to produce electricity the fastest way possible, and that means accelerate the implementation of renewables. And to do that, we need faster permitting times, and we need to free cash. So we need to stop this TTF, because that is going to be preventing further investments for most companies. And second, we need to stop using gas to heat our homes. And that means a drastic implementation of heat pumps across the Eurozone by ways of good policies that most member states have been thinking about, but have not yet implemented in a concerted manner. And I think that is going to be a very important step to free ourselves from the less intelligent use of gas that we have today, which is basically burning it to heat our homes and burning it to generate electricity. If we succeed to do that, Europe is likely to almost halve its gas demand in the next 5 to 10 years, which is a big step if you want to look at a little bit longer term. I pause here because I think there will be time for additional considerations later on. Thanks.
Many thanks, Francesco. That was super interesting also how you kind of framed your kind of the reasoning for the interventions in the market, and I hope we find time in the panel also to look a bit deeper into the question on how you think about capping the volatility in the TTF. But now, please allow me to give the floor to Claire Wesson. She has been in the French government before, but now she is Executive Vice President General Secretary at ENGIE. So also one of the biggest European utilities, with a bit of a focus in gas, but also working a lot on electricity, for example, here in Belgium. So Claire, the same question as to.
Yes, hello everybody, and thanks a lot. I think this is a fascinating time to be addressing this question, and really great panel. So let me start by rebounding on what Dieter said. We are talking here about the energy system. We must not forget that. I mean, we sometimes have more a focus on gas because of the Russian crisis, but the reality is that gas and electricity are totally intertwined. Today, when we are producing electricity, and that was just mentioned by Francisco, we are using a lot of gas. Not only we are using a lot of gas, but a number of member states are putting back coal units online or extending the lifetime of coal units. So if we want to have a proper picture, first thing not to forget is that yes, we do need, and I'll come back to this, we do need energy savings. We do need them both on electricity and on gas because they are totally intertwined. That's the first thing. And second thing, indeed, we must ensure that whatever we do is compatible with our carbon neutrality path. And in this respect, it's of course no fully bad news that coal is being put back online. As you know, producing electricity out of coal produces twice as much as producing electricity out of gas. So really bad news, and we need to make sure as soon as possible that we are able to balance supply and demand in another way. So let me turn then to two, I would say two buckets, a bit like Dieter did. I think one is the physical balance and the other one is the issue of prices. Of course, both are absolutely key. Physical balance, we do need to ensure the security of supply in the European Union. It's not a given, and the European Commission took a number of steps. When we look at demand, I think one thing that's clearly a no regret move is more soberness, sobriété in French, more energy efficiency. I mean, that's clearly a no regret move. Why? Because we all know that to ensure carbon neutrality, we will need to decrease our energy consumption by 30 to 40%. So whatever we do in this respect, that's structural, is a step in the right direction. Second, we do see some demand destruction in the short run. And I want to mention this because I think it's vastly underestimated. When we look at EU-wide industrial uses, we already see quite a significant drop. When we look at German figures in particular, year on year, August, and I know I'm talking in front of many economists, so like me, you look at those kind of figures, it's minus 30% year on year, the German industrial demand of gas, okay? So we do see some demand destruction, which to some extent is of course something that will be helpful from a security of supply perspective. At the same time, we need to be mindful of the fact that this probably indicates that there is a big macro shock underway. Stepping a bit aside from the issue of energy. So that's the demand side. On the supply side, short run, like others have said, we do need to diversify, of course, and that's what we did as a company at ENGIE. We did diversify our sources of supply, of gas in particular. I mean, we are now at a point where, as you know, Gazprom has cut its deliveries through Nord Stream 1. We have been in a situation where we thought this was a possible option. So during the last few months and since February, we made sure that we were diversifying to be able to supply our customers. And today we are in a situation which makes us feel confident. But that's the short run. And there is this winter and then the next winter. And we need to be mindful of the fact that the level of storage today is indeed very encouraging. And by the way, it's even higher, for instance, in France, we're well above 90%, but we will need the storage, we will need the flows of LNG continuing to come into Europe, which for now we see. And we will need to make sure that we are able to face next winter again. So short term, this issue of diversity of supply. Medium run, full agreement with what was said on we need to accelerate renewables, both electricity and gas. Biomethane has a strong potential. In a country like France, biomethane by 2030 can replace in volume Russian gas. So we need to push on different renewables. One small thing, not so small, that we need to keep in mind when we think of the physical balance is you shouldn't only look at the volumes for the entire year. There is also the issue of peak demand, and Dieter mentioned peak demand. And here I would caution a bit and nuance a bit what Francesco said. We are in a situation where the electricity system is already under big tension for a number of reasons this year. There is, clearly less water, not much wind during the summer, some issues of capacity of nuclear plants that are online in France. So a number of factors which we hope some of them will disappear. Hydro, frankly, we don't know. There is the issue of climate change. We need to be super careful not to overburden, in a way, the electricity system, in particular for peaks. And when we think about heating in residential housing, in France, we are already the country where there is the most, heating is mostly reliant on electricity, which means that our peak demand in winter is bigger. Our elasticity to temperature is bigger than other EU countries. That produces a lot of tension on the system. So let's be mindful. Electricity everywhere very quickly may not be the solution, and some solutions such as hybrid heat pump may be a good way to combine electricity most of the time, but some gas in peak. Let me just finish on on the issue of prices, because I think volume are key, prices are key. I think here we need to realize that the market is clearly dysfunctional. That was said by the others. So yes, we do need some market intervention. We have been advocating for months for a price cap on the wholesale price of gas, which requires, of course, a bit more elaboration. But that's the only way to decrease the macro shock on Europe. Make sure that the producers pay some of it. That's one. Second, on electricity, I was very encouraged to see what Kadri Simpson was saying on dismantling the automaticity of the increase in the price cap on electricity markets and even lowering the price. I think that goes in the very good direction. Last point, when we look at prices, there are long-term arrangements between producers and consumers, companies, PPAs. We should be able to develop, including trans-border PPAs, more easily in Europe. They are a good way to ensure prices that are okay for the producer, okay for the corporate. We do have a lot of PPAs, NG, elsewhere in the world. I think there is a lot of potential there. And last point, to rebound on Francesco's point on margin calls. Indeed, we see this as a real system. It's a potential systemic threat to the market to have these big margin calls. It's okay for strong players like us, but it can destabilize weaker players. And certainly, it's not the best use of cash right now.
Yes, thanks a lot, Claire. It's fascinating times in which energy companies are calling for caps on prices. That is. And
it came from my traders.
Yes. Now, maybe just one comment on the gas demand. So Bruegel is also going to set up a gas demand tracker for different member states. So we hope to be able to show that to you in a few weeks, with where you can essentially see monthly gas demand development in different sectors in European countries. But after this short commercial, let me give the floor to Ioana Pandera. Ioana is currently the president of Forum Energie, one of probably the most important energy transition think tank in Poland. And Ioana has a history in Polish government, both with a focus on environment and a focus on Europe. So it's very well placed to also kind of try to see what, from your perspective, are the things that need to be urgently done to get us over the winter.
Thank you very much, Georg, and thank you for the invitation. Indeed, a lot has been said already, because as you mentioned at the beginning, we have to differentiate between long-term measures and short-term measures. Long-term measures were discussed yesterday. Now we are discussing short-term measures. Among the short-term measures, I think that the let's say, choice of what we can do is quite limited. Maybe one thing that we should differentiate between short-term measures which can really help us to overcome this winter, and short-term measures like decisions which are needed to be taken quickly, which will help us with the next winters. So this is something what I see a little chaos among the decision makers in my country of what is needed. And where are the priorities? And certainly this is the biggest crisis ever we experience in energy sector. So we need to learn. Probably after a few months or years, we will be wiser in delivering solution on how to tackle it. But now it's just big lesson for us, and some decision makers, including my decision makers in my country, they pretend they do everything in order to show that there is no problem. Don't look up. We will survive. All will be good. And this is the major threat which I see now. So when like really not taking the actions which are needed, not to be honest with voters also, about how serious the situation is. And we mainly focus now on subsidizing consumers, starting with households, where we know that, in my view, this is not 100% wrong, because we need to help poorer people. Some of the consumers will really struggle. In Poland, we have huge problem with heating, much larger than electricity. So actually, people who are burning coal in their households will really struggle with lack of fuel. It was Russian fuel. Poland decided to cut off the fuel already in April. So we now have the situation. We have no fuel. If we have, it's 400% more expensive compared to the last year. So indeed, some help for poorer people is needed. But what I'm missing in this discussion is the income criterion, because now, of course, we are unprepared. We have been talking for years that we need to solve energy poverty, but in fact, there is no data, no clear measures on what is energy poverty and how to tackle it. And now, exactly with this urgency, we only can spread the money from helicopter, which will, in my view, only increase the problem, will increase inflation, which in many countries is very high. In my country, 16% and growing. So this is what I see. So help only for selected consumers, and households are maybe key in the social terms, but what I'm missing is to involve industry, because industry, in my view, is now just left without any concept, and the demand reduction in the industry can be really higher than in households. So, of course, we can also encourage decision makers to make a big campaign and to communicate with people how serious the situation is, and but still, I think that the larger demand destruction or reduction can be done in industry. And what we could see now already last week, biggest Polish gas consumer, Azoty, they just stopped the production of fertilizer. It's one of the largest fertilizer producers in Europe, by the way, because they said gas is just too expensive. And I think that we need really auctions on demand reduction in the industry, paid auctions. So industry now, which is, of course, economy is heated, so all is going still well. So we have high demand from for all, let's say, all the industrial production, but it may really be at crisis at some point of time in winter, where many companies will say, no, I won't sell my products if the gas is so expensive, electricity is so expensive. So I see it as a so households only limited income criterion, industry as a priority, and I think that what is also very, very relevant is exactly sending the signal what we will do next winter, because now we are really spending budgets which are higher than the health expenditures, at least also in my country. But what will happen next year? I mean, what people should do in order to a lot of investment can be done by people, by industry, and it's very important so that we will say, invest in energy efficiency, build renewables. We should overcome grid congestions, which is now the major challenge. So we may speak about ambitious renewables target, but once we want to overcome the mental but also technical barriers in integration of renewables, we won't really deliver the solution. So this is, and this is maybe also short term, but not necessarily bringing results in the next winter. And this is what I see as a major priorities. What I'm worried about is that we really now do everything in order to moderate the price signal, and still the price signal, I think that all countries are doing it in a different way, and this is, by the way, also very important that we will coordinate it on the European Commission level. I also think that the power system will be at trouble, because we will now certainly very fast electrify our heating. This is something what is happening now in Poland. I think we are the largest heat pump market at the moment in Europe, or one of the largest, and we will face a tremendous, once our power system is not in trouble now, it will have a problem in the next 2 winters. So exactly shifting the demand and flexibility of the power system, tariff design is the next topic which which is short term, but will bring relief in the years to come. And apart from this, I just concluding last sentence, because I see also the trend that we tend to see, tend to say that now we are coming back to coal because coal has saved us. I don't see really how we can increase production in coal. So those investments take years, and in many countries we just don't have coal. And really shifting imports from Russia to other countries is also not the solution which we need, because we see that for years we underestimate what actually energy security means, and we made a lot of mistakes. And now, in my view, only energy efficiency, demand reduction, renewables development, and flexibility of the power system, and sector coupling also, which will speed up, is the solution. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Diana. I very much appreciate also your point on kind of targeted support to consumers and kind of this issue of vulnerable consumers, which will probably be one of the most politically difficult points in the coming winter for all European governments. Now, what I find fascinating in the four presentations so far has been that it's relatively consistent: reduce demand, reduce prices, and reduce risk in the energy trading. Now, if you put it in that line, it fits. But if you turn it the other way around, I have a bit of a struggle to see how reduced prices and as a result reduced demand is going to work. So I think my take would be we should make sure that we put the horse in front of the cart. But I would like to give the floor back to Dieter. With we heard a lot in terms of market interventions, and we know that on Friday there will be discussions. We understand that you're not going to tell us the details of things, but would be quite interesting to hear a bit your reaction on the proposals that you have heard, including the volatility cap that I found very interesting.
Thank you very much. And indeed, really very, very good points have been made. And I think, as you've said, we have a fairly consistent assessment analysis of the challenges and also of the basic principles that will have to drive the interventions we will have to make, because we are in a unique crisis, the biggest energy crisis we have seen. It has macro impacts, as others have said. So we do need to act, and we do need to intervene in ways that we had said a few years ago that was not the best way to go. And I think the points are very valid in that context. So if I can respond to a few of them. First of all, the concern about collateral being required on companies, the very, very high levels, the impact it has on investments, on liquidity. This is obviously something that needs to be addressed, and we're looking at that. If you look at the European angle to it, it is to make sure that the necessary state guarantees are possible, that we facilitate that so that that can take place in the smoothest possible way. But of course also, as Mrs. Starace has said, looking at the collateral requirements, looking at what can be done there from a financial market perspective. And here I'm way outside of energy. We're really looking into the broader markets that are relevant here as well. So that is part of the discussion that is ongoing. And then Mrs. Starace also pointed to the need for further reform of the electricity market design, and I'm sure you will have seen that President von der Leyen has indeed announced that. So what we do now is, what is the necessary emergency intervention, immediate term? What is it we need to do right now? And that you could see as an early deliverable, as a front load in the further work ongoing on electricity market design. I hope we can all agree that a revision of electricity market design is a complex exercise that one should not overtake overnight. And so there we're launching an inception impact assessment, a full impact assessment, public consultations, so as to make sure that we look at the relevant options in the context of a review and a revision of the electricity market design. And our aim is to come forward with a proposal next year. I think a number of the points made here have been are part of what will be considered, including the longer term electricity market and how to link into some of the existing mechanisms, PPAs, which are an important part of the market and really critical to give some of that predictability and stability and incentivize investments into renewable energy. So very important points. The points have also been made, Joanna, thank you, for the need to bear in mind vulnerable households. How do we make sure that we address energy poverty? And how do we make sure that the interventions we have in mind, our emergency tools, that they help those groups? And as you've said, there are data challenges, also because one vulnerable household in one member state is not necessarily a vulnerable household in another. So on the one hand, I think you have a very strong need for member state lead in deciding how is it done at national level, not what is done, but how is it done to adapt to national circumstances. But then at the same time, it has to be clear that there are certain minimum of terawatt hours that every household would need, and so to look at how do we balance that, and as you have said, Georg, how do we balance that with maintaining the necessary price signals to reduce demand? Because if we take away the price signal, demand is not going to respond to the very high prices and to what is essentially a shortage in our markets. And so maintain a price signal, but making sure that we protect the vulnerable households, but also that we make sure that our industry remains competitive and adapts to what is a new reality in global and in European energy markets. Thank you.
Thanks. Can I ask you, Claire, to come back to the question of market design? So what would be your take? I mean, there is a timing issue. I mean, we need to do things in the very short term. But as Dieter said, I mean, we have now an electricity market design that has been developed over 20, 30 years and has, with the network code, some 1,000 pages. So going kind of putting hands on that will be quite complex. Do you see the interventions that you're proposing as temporary measures or as things that are going already to be structural changes?
Yes, thank you. Indeed, I mean, first point, I very much concur with what Dieter was saying on the fact that touching at market design, is something you should only do with a trembling hand, meaning we have a market that has worked in normal times, and now it doesn't work, but we are in crazy times. So we need to make sure, and I think that's very much what the European Commission has in mind, but this undertaking is done, I would say, in a very rational way with consultations to make sure that we will have tomorrow a framework that enables the investments to be made, and at the same time that maybe improving some features that we see as not working so well in the current system. And frankly, I don't have the answer. I don't know if Dieter has the answers. I think it's a whole work stream, and we will all need to put a lot of intelligence into this. So the mechanisms I was thinking about are indeed more short term, and I don't know if they need to stay. But the idea that when markets are totally dysfunctional, it can be a good idea to prevent the prices from going to the roof. Is certainly something that has been discovered by others. I'm thinking about Texas in the energy crisis. We are in Europe in a market where on electricity prices, we almost have the opposite. I mean, each time a crazy level is reached, then the current mechanisms allows for a jump in the price of €1,000 per megawatt hours automatically in the next few weeks. So we have, in French, we would say échelle de perroquet. Huh? We have a kind of mechanism with automatic increases whenever a crazy price is reached. We are currently at €4,000 per megawatt hours as a limit for now, but the limit could be breached with this mechanism and automatically adjusted. Just for reference, the average price 1 year ago, before the crisis, was 50-60. Okay, so just to put things in perspective of how dysfunctional the market has gone. So yes, we do need to, and for gas, I mean, the prices used to be around 20. We've seen more than 200, 300. So we are clearly I mean, multiplication of 10 or 15 times the normal prices is a dysfunctional market, and we should have short-term measures to address them. And maybe they can stay in the long run. I mean, maybe we will be happy to have protections for future crises, which we hope we will avoid, but limiting crazy prices.
Thanks, Claire. Francesco, can I ask you to maybe say 2 more words on the kind of on the volatility cap for the TTF, and maybe indicate a bit kind of how you think that could, whether that will really address the issue substantially, or whether that will be more a temporary measure that we need in the current situation.
Let's all remember, when did we start to use such an index? We started to use this index about 12 years ago, 10 years ago, and it was a very clever idea to have such an index, because it enhanced liquidity in the gas markets in Europe, which were not liquid. It gave traders common language with which molecules of gas could be valued around the Eurozone. So it served its purpose beautifully. And all of a sudden, now we are demonizing the index. It's nothing wrong with the index itself. It's the way in which the fragility of the gas markets have shown. The index is simply a tool that explains us the situation. And this is a war. And in a war situation, typically, some free market economics need to be a little bit redesigned. I mean, it's normal. But what I think we have to understand is that this mechanism is perverse. And I will just give you a small example so that we all understand what we're talking about here. Let's assume that states, member states of the Union, give companies additional credit lines in order for them to withstand the pressure of the margin calls that their contracts have. The net result of this will be for the price of gas to go higher. There will be no end to this spiral. I mean, traders will push it to limits that today are even unthinkable, because they will know that governments will fund this going forward without any limit. So this is what we have in front of us. It's a tool that is completely out of hand, and it's not working for what it was designed to do. It's working without any control. So when this happens, there are many examples that similar things have happened in the past in different trades and in different trading platforms. But when this happens, it's normal to just say, look, it's time to kind of put it back to rest. What we are saying is that we should just cap it to a level high enough to ensure that without any doubts, gas coming from outside of the Eurozone will find an attractive price in Europe. So you can say anything below 80 or anything above 80, but not certainly 300. So once you put this cap, you don't need to change contracts that are indexed to the TTF. You don't need to change anything. TTF will continue to work. But as Claire has said, you've seen that there are European markets platform that cap European prices at 3,000 euros, 4,000 euros. Now that we would do the same on the TTF for a period of, say, 6 to 8 months, just enough to go through the winter and the springtime of 2023. And then you can reassess this. It's not such a big traumatic change. It's just a small intervention of the Amsterdam Stock Exchange that would put this cap. And once you've done that, you give governments of Europe and companies the time to do the proper thing, which is what the Director General just said. Reflect on, with the right timing, on such an important thing as market design, which cannot be done overnight. It's a very important issue. But you cannot do this with lucidity while you have such a big problem as this crazy mechanism killing your economy and preventing your regulators and governments to really put time in the most important things. So I think it's something that would not take that much. By the way, it will not prevent gas to be sold in Europe. On top of which, I should add that would there be one cargo, 2, 3, 4 of LNG that would require higher prices? You can always say, for that cargo, there is a CFD mechanism, and we will fund the additional money out of, we're talking about really transparency in saying, who is it that is selling us gas at 100 euros? Well, let's see who's this guy and why is this such an important cargo? But once that is clear, well, let's do that. So it's not such a big trauma. Now we can do it because
Francesco, can we
we finished the supply of and then the storage of gas.
Okay, I think that's a topic that would merit probably an hour of discussion. I mean, probably you're going to have these discussions quite often. As Ditte is going to have to leave at 1:30 sharp, I would like to allow the floor one or two questions. I think there was one question from Nicolas Veron over there.
Yes, thank you. Nicolas Veron at Bruegel. As you just said, Georg, it would require much more time, but I just would like to understand the policy intent of this proposal on margin requirements, because I know nothing about energy markets and TTF, but I remember vividly moments in the Eurozone crisis where very similar claims were made about margin requirements on markets that were related to sovereign debt, including a country Mr. Starche knows well. And we had that debate at Bruegel on several occasions. The clearinghouse at that time, of course, was mainly LCH. And there is a fundamental challenge in asking a clearinghouse to basically break its risk management, its most important risk management mechanism in the middle of a crisis. So when you say it's a small thing to do, well, it's a small thing, but it's a big thing. And we know that clearinghouses are very systemic. If they have bad risk management, the bill will fall on the taxpayer. And if we break their risk management in the middle of a crisis, probably bad things will happen. So my question is whether you actually question the fundamental mechanism of having these contracts cleared on a central clearinghouse, or whether your call for intervention is more modest. But in that case, I don't understand it. Thank you.
Maybe I can explain that. No, I think the margin requirements need to be staying, and I think it's fundamentally that this is a risk tool that no one can. I think no one wishes to change. But the fact is that you have a margin call that moves up and down without any relation to the underlying commodity, because this is what TTF today is. There is no correlation between TTF prices and gas prices as they are imported into Europe. And the proof is that, it's enough that, Mr. Putin says something or Mrs. von der Leyen says something else, that this index goes up and down 100 euros. And as a function of that, margin calls go up and down 100 euros for billions and billions of euros. That has nothing to do with risk management. It's actually a worsening of the risk for everybody. That's what I'm saying, is that the concept should stay, but the underlying commodity and the index are completely disconnected as we are talking, and that's risky.
Okay. Are there questions for Ms. Juul-Jorgensen? I see one there in the back.
Yes, a question for the Director General. I'm Jan Litjens from the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs, and I have a question on the possible intervention in the electricity market. And I was wondering if you would introduce a price limit on inframarginal energy production, non-gas energy production. How do you prevent the market exchange drying up and shifting to over-the-counter trade?
Thank you. So we are designing the measure as we speak, discussing internally. We have a technical seminar with all member states today on various aspects of both gas and electricity prices, and I'm going to Coreper after this. And so I think I will need to respect those interinstitutional working methods. We are obviously looking carefully at what is the best form of intervention. Once again, I set out the guiding principles, our red line, so to say, in the beginning in terms of internal market functioning, ensuring that we are aligned with the Green Deal, so that requires us to maintain the necessary investment incentives for renewables, among other things. And in terms of the markets working together, OTC and others, I think it's important to bear in mind that there is a link here with the longer-term electricity market that Mr. Starace has pointed to, the PPAs that you have pointed to, that there are different ways of organizing that market, and that is not a bad thing in and of itself. So to the extent you get investor certainty, stability, predictability in these markets, well, then I think we are aligning with what is one of the guiding principles we've set ourselves. And that is somewhat veiled terms to try to explain the direction we're taking while respecting the interinstitutional process, and most importantly, respecting the fact that energy ministers are meeting on Monday to discuss that and hopefully give some guidance in terms of next steps. The other point I wanted to make, and here I'm coming in on some of the points that Mr. Starace and others have been making, is right here and now the focus is on electricity prices, electricity markets. But I think, as others have also pointed out, we of course need to look at the TTF, look at the benchmarks. We have what is the best way to do that. We need to look at the financial market aspects. We need to look at the consumer aspects. And so I think we can say that we've got our work carved out for us for the coming months. But as you have also said, Joanna, not just for this winter, but we also need to look at the winter ahead and how do we make sure that storage fills in the next storage filling season. So this crisis is not over with one proposal next week. There's going to be a lot more happening, need for more analysis. And I think one of the encouraging aspects of that is that we have seen from across European member states really interesting analysis ideas. We have been inspired by some of that. You've seen some interesting Greek ideas on the revenue model and electricity, for example, and that's just one example of the many useful ideas that have been circulating. And so, in that sense, I think we're working in a very European way, seeking European solutions where that is needed, but obviously reflecting specific national circumstances where that is needed. Thank you.
So then, yeah, there's one question there.
Thank you, Can Ercan, Energy Counselor from Turkish Permanent Delegation to the EU. Yesterday and today, the headlines were on Russian and Chinese agreement on all terms for additional supply of Russian gas to China via Mongolia. And my takeaway from yesterday's and this morning's excellent sessions in Bruegel's annual meeting is that we are heading towards a more polarized world. As recently seen in Black Sea grain deal, Turkey is an indispensable game changer in times of crisis. Also, Turkey is also European member country, a candidate member country, who can potentially lower gas and electricity prices of European consumers. So, but in EU repower strategy, we don't see any well-balanced approach towards Turkey, because Turkey is not a solely gas transit country, but with a huge potential to produce renewable energy. It's currently 55%. So how do you evaluate untapped and undiscussed role of Turkey to lower gas and electricity prices in Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I can say a few words about that before I go to Coreper, where colleagues are awaiting. So our repower strategy that we've set out earlier this year is for Europe and for countries in our neighborhood, and so very much working with Turkey also in that context. Turkey is part of our electricity grid. We already have a very close integration in terms of energy markets, and we see scope for closer cooperation also as regards gas transit, as you have mentioned, but really closer cooperation in terms of making best use of the LNG infrastructure and in terms of supply. So that's very much an integrated part of the work we're doing. I haven't talked a lot about supply today and gas supplies, but you know, a lot of work ongoing under the EU Energy Platform, significant diversification since the beginning of the year, with very impressive amounts in the sense that additional LNG coming in has more than replaced the reduction we have seen from Russian supplies. And again, close cooperation, close partnership with Turkey, both in terms of electricity and gas, within that overarching framework, and very much with the overall neighborhood, the Western Balkans, Ukraine, Moldova are very close partners in this context as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dieter. And then don't want to keep you from the co-rapper. And but I think it's very helpful that we kind of have at the end also a switch from demand to supply side and also short-term supply side options. My feeling, and we published a paper on kind of a European grand energy bargain yesterday, where we are also arguing that there's not only demand side options untapped in Europe left, but there are still also short-term supply side options that can be drawn into. And I think Joanna.
Yes, I wanted to comment because indeed there is a new topic which emerged after war in Ukraine escalated, is the topic of interconnection with Ukraine, electricity grids with Ukraine. So it's actually a very fast-changing topic. I don't know to which extent you see that, but we see it as Ukraine at the moment has a huge oversupply, and there are some grids, in example with Poland, but not only with Poland, with other countries as well. And now we are discussing, so first some decisions were taken in order to extend the grid until end of this year. So speed investment, but still is the question mark to which extent we want to integrate Ukraine market. What does it mean in terms of ETS and CO2? And for it seems that also for Ukraine is a very important topic. I've heard President Zelensky saying we cannot sell wheat, so we will sell electricity. And now indeed it is also very important on which role this electricity from Ukraine could play in Europe in terms of let's say shortage of energy. And one comment on market design very quickly, because I think that you're right, Claire, that the market design was right, but it was done actually 10-15 years ago, the principle for it, and the market has changed. So we have different energy sources with different generation, completely different. And in my view, it was okay, but now it is not okay anymore. And this discussion was just too slow on how to change the market design. We were not forced to do this. Now we are forced to do it. And in my view, it is not only short term, it will be for longer. So the question is, you know, the thinking now in this market design reform, rather, you know, that it will stay with us. I cannot imagine that that we will come back with having, you know, such a larger share of renewables, that we will come back to the old principles where we cannot actually see the benefits of increasing share of renewables with zero marginal costs. So this is one comment from my side.
I see two more questions there.
Thanks, Sami Haraz from the SRB. Maybe following on from the question that Nicolas had earlier, and particularly to Francesco and Claire, given the absence of a cap at the moment, how are you managing right now your risk? Because that's kind of what's puzzling me a bit about this debate, right? We've got the slightly dysfunctional derivatives markets, and just managing on the spot. I'm sure your risk managers would have a heart attack. So how are you doing it right now?
Claire? Francesco?
Maybe Claire should start.
Okay. Yes, you start.
Yeah, no, well, we have looked carefully at our management of risk, of course, to try to minimize the impact of this volatility and the associated margin calls. And we do face large margin calls. So we are, but as a big company, I mean, we have secured all the liquidity we need. And so we are confident that we're able to face these big margin calls. They can, I mean, they are really very sizable. But the concern we have as a market player is really about smaller actors, weaker actors, and something that may not be obvious for all of you, although I'm sure there are many energy specialists in the room, is that energy markets, energy players are by nature hedging themselves. I mean, we are on a market where there are all kinds of hedging. Whenever we take a consumer on, for instance, we're hedging for its future consumption. That's the way the market operates. So that's very intrinsic to the market to have these kinds of positions, which means that large players, I mean, and it's true for large players and smaller players. Large players know how to manage their risk, basically to ensure that they have ample liquidity. I mean, both inside and with short credit lines if needed. Smaller players, it might be more tricky. So to get back to Francesco's point earlier, the idea is not to suppress all mechanisms that indeed protect actors such as LCH, but really to find ways to make sure that we are not going to end up in a systemic crisis where a small actor will be unable to face its margin calls and may be triggered into fire sales, hence destabilizing even more the market.
Let me add to what Claire said, because what she said is exactly the way we work. But typically, we have been doing this for many, many years. So when this crisis, for example, started about September, October last year, you remember prices were surprisingly high already on the gas market, and the TTF was going to 80, 90 euros, which was first time ever. At that time, we had already sold energy through 2021 and 2022, and partly 2023, and that we always do. So when we buy gas from Algeria, from the US, this gas is sold forward on the market, and as a function of that, prices are set for customers. So you can say that our hedge is the hedge of our customers. Our customers, the ones that we have sold energy at fixed prices to, did not experience any price increase through 21 and 22. So that hedge goes to customers eventually. But again, like Claire said, this is because we are a large company and we have a policy that started a long time ago. So this is something that we carry on all the time. What we are concerned about are two things. That number one, the hedge, I mean, the margin calls are freezing inordinate amount of money, like 10 times what they used to freeze 2 years ago. And that is a damage to us and the rest of the system. This money cannot work. This money cannot be used for investment. It's just set aside. It's our money. It's not that. We have the cash, but we cannot use it. So this is a damage on the longer term, 23, 24. If this doesn't change, there will be less money to invest. And number two, it's true that minor players have had problems. Not even minor players. If you talk about Uniper, it's not a small player, it's a large player. And it had to be helped by the KfW in Germany because of this problem. So if small or medium-sized players default, the net result is that they will have to unwind their position on the exchange. The net result will be an increase of the TTF index, which result in higher margin calls for everybody. So it's a domino effect. We think we should have to cut before it triggers some systemic damage. That is why I think the index needs to be stopped for a while.
Thanks a lot, Francesco. Let me give the last word to Joanna. I think we are at the end of the time for today. I think we all understand that this topic is extremely dynamic and is moving. And I mean, at the beginning of this year, we had problems with thinking about how we can come physically over the next winter. That seems to be getting more, well, seem to be getting more relaxed because demand destruction, as Claire said, has been dramatic, and we also managed to get additional supplies. So on that front, it's more calm than currently the issue of high prices, and then in the longer term or in the upcoming term now the question also about the interaction of energy companies in the market. So I think it will not become boring in the next months, and I hope you you stay also with us in our analysis and help us also to guide our analysis. And I would like to give the last word to Johanna, and thanks for much.
Sorry, I know that once you finish the debate, everybody is just wait to walk out. But I want to put one thing, let's say, at the very end. It's a pity that Dieter left, because what I think is really that the European Commission should take the initiative on vulnerable households, because it's now the topic which is entirely left to the member state level. And in my view, many countries do not have such policies. And we took, as country, as EU, the decision that we will phase out Russian fossil fuels, which I think is 100% right. But now what we can see, it was political decision, and actually the cost of it will be paid by society, and among others, the poorer ones. So what I think is really now very important to push countries to prepare for this. I'm not worried about market design, because I think that utilities will always do everything in order to protect their businesses. But what we may really lose in the next months or years to come is this unity within the EU, that the project will really not forget about people who are at the end of the entire ecosystem, and because they will pay, the cost for them will be really high. And this is something what I think initiative of the European Commission is needed, calling force member state, not only reduce demand, but also prepare really good programs for people who are a little poorer, a little more vulnerable than others. So this is from my side. Thank you.
Yeah, I couldn't add anything. I mean, I think it's a crucial point, not only for social purposes, but also for political, for political unity and eventually the support of Ukraine in this war. Because if we don't manage to protect consumers, we have seen the demonstrations in Prague, and I think this unsettling development is risking to propagate throughout the winter. So thank you very much for joining us, and sorry for not having been able to take all the questions. Thanks.
Fascinating.